This would be part 5 of the Tabby Cat Reclining, and it's always a difficult choice with backgrounds. Do you paint a background? Do you not paint a background? Do you leave it alone? I've got the image this far, and some people might think, well, leave it alone. I have tried another version, just the top half of the cat with top part of the cat with some background colours, and I think it would be useful to try to show the edge of the fur, certainly on the nearer parts. It's always a risk with a watercolour the further you go into it, and this is an option. So I've made some colours that I think aren't in the cat. So these are colours that don't exist in the painting of the cat, but they are a little bit darker. And this one is I would call that a blue-grey with cerulean blue, ultramarine, and there's a little bit of ochre in that. There might be some crimson. So that's one colour. Violet grey would be another one, which is something like that. Again, it's a colour that doesn't exist in the painting so far. It's a little bit bright, perhaps needs toning down, but I'm trying to avoid exactly painting the same colours that are in the. That's a greeny colour. None of those colours, I think, exist in this painting so far, but they are echoes of some of these colours. There are similarities with that green and some of the greeny grey, but it's not as rich as the background colour. So partly the object of the background would be to enhance or assist the painting of the cat, push it forward a little bit. So I'm going to try cautiously up here on the, just wetting this, but not wetting up to the edge, but wetting near to the edge of the cat, but not right up to the edge. And I'm going to have a go at painting some of this background. I'll show some of it, and then I'll maybe show the whole painting a bit later. And I'm trying to show off the edge qualities in this subject. So the cat is obviously furry, and the ear has a furry, has hairs coming, their hairs sort of coming out of the ear. So doing something like this with a little brush right up to this edge, and then letting that colour drift away. There is a bit of masking fluid there still. So even this edge is quite bristly, quite furry, and not a smooth edge. I'll try that down here. The head of the cat being there's a little bit of greeny colour in there. So I'm mixing these colours that I showed earlier into wet. A little bit of an edge there, just to try and show that as not being smooth. And here I think it's just not quite the same treatment. This is further away, this little bit of back here, so I might try and blur that edge. Let's take a damp brush, see if I can just lose that edge altogether along there. I may need to come back to that, may need to lift it out. I'd like to try and dissolve that edge and not have an edge there. So the outer edge of the background is another element that really isn't important, so I'd like for that colour just to dissolve and just leave that to melt away. And the edge of the ear, you can try a hairline gap, that work. The ear is fairly smooth, it's mostly skin, it's very close cropped hairs, close hairs. And again, a little bit of variety of colour, not quite all the same colour. A little ochre with that violet because it's getting rather bright. I am trying to avoid the same colours that are in the cat already. That would be useful if that was a little bit darker there. So there's time to do this whilst the colour is wet, and even to try, see if I can get a little bit of lifting out on that edge there. That's the sort of lost edge of the cat's body. So back on here there is kind of furry edge there. Showing off the head, because the head is the focus of this painting. So it's the, well, I'm thinking more carefully about edges. Let's try and lose that other edge there. Just blur that away. And then I'm going to drop some colour in. And these colours will separate, I hope, granulate right up to this edge here. So this is an edge, another edge that is furry, and since it's part of the head, I'm going to think about that. This is quite a dark mix of ultramarine and crimson and yellow ochre. A little bit of just a glow of a gap around there, trying to keep that texture going. And back here. So this is only on the head, I think, for this treatment, not elsewhere, because it's sharper edges tend to come forwards, blurred edges tend to go away. I've tried to pick what could be described as cool to neutral colours for the background. That would be grey violet, grey blue, grey green. Those would be the cool to neutral ones. And a bit of fur there. See, the cat is a three-dimensional creature, and it has some weight, and that would mean shadow, cast shadow. Let's see what that's like. So I've left a lost edge there, which will be easier to join onto later, because I've got time to do all that for the minute. And again, continuing wetting local areas. So this part of the body here is, I think, a bit of a lost edge, because it's away from the head. But it nevertheless is where a shadow ought to be. These colours rely a lot on ultramarine, and so ultramarine's a really good colour for granulating, and that's something that I think that it's a quality in watercolour that only exists in watercolour, and it I think it can be very effective in suggesting texture without having to paint it. So I'm leaving a gap along there, and I'm going to try and blur that gap a little bit. This is tricky because this is just a damp brush, and I'm aware that this could go, because it's all quite wet here, this could go the other way and all come back. So how much do you do this? Well, I don't want to make this watercolour very dark, but on the other hand, the cat is quite light, relatively light, silvery grey, so I'd quite like to show that. And on a white piece of paper, it's difficult to represent something that's light. So contrast. One of the oldest devices in art is contrast. See if I can make that. Just soften that grey a little bit. Yeah. Take it away. So in some ways this is a shadow. This is a bit like a cast shadow. But how much of it do you have? This is the question. So soft edges, hard edges, blurred edges, it's all part of this. This poor comes forwards, so I'm going to try and leave this light edge here. This is quite dark here, so if I put something dark next to it, I don't know, that's not going to work so well. So it's all about light against dark. Light against dark, along here, along here. Light against dark. So if I make that really dark next to that, that's just going to disappear. And maybe that edge, do I need to do anything there? There is a cast shadow along here. So it's generally underneath where I need to put shadow and not on the top edge. So this would qualify as being underneath here. Again, it's underneath something that's furry. A little bit of dark there. And that edge is the edge of the shadow, which should be a bit lost. And this edge against the leg of the cat, also not quite so sharply defined. That's fur there. So it's a dry, flat brush I'm using to do that with. And then a little more colour, contrast. And leave a gap around there. And just blur that a little bit. I can leave it alone. Difficult to decide what to do there. Difficult to know how much to leave it alone. That edge, there's an edge forming there which I'd like to stop. Forming a hard edge. There's another hard edge happening. It's there. So you can come back and work on these edges later on, and when it's dry, and soften edges. It's obviously might in some ways be more controllable to work on when it's dry. And a lot of what happens in watercolour, this is looser watercolour, happens very quickly. So working on dry can be a slower business. So that's a top edge there, but this isn't. This is an underside edge, and there should be a little bit of shadow there. How much to put in now? That's a difficult question. Anyway, this is quite a furry edge, long fur along here. A little bit of cast shadow. Trying to leave a gap to represent the lightness of fur at the edge of the animal. Let's try and blur that edge. Lose that. I'll put in a little more colour there. I quite like the colour that cerulean produces with ultramarine and ochre, because it doesn't. I haven't used it in the cat, so it's contrast to that. Let's try and blur that away. Lose this edge right here altogether. Let's come back and just put a little more colour in there. More granulation, again, that's separating the qualities that are in the painting of the cat. So that's quite a dark edge along there. But it's too coarse, this bit here. So damp, flat brush, I'm going to try and drag and disturb or remove the sharpness of that edge. Just stipple with this brush, drag along there. Now, lifting out produces a blurred edge. So that's what I'm trying to do, is lift out along that edge too. So the only part of the cat that's got a hard definition with the fur, got a sort of textural definition, would be the head, I think. The rest of it gets rather busy if I try and put put shadow everywhere, put texture everywhere, put edges everywhere. So there's a wetting this edge, wetting in here a little bit. This is further away, so distance, depth of field, this would be a lot more blurred. Let's see if I can make that. It's not quite the same as the cat, not quite the same as the values in the cat. Let's lose that. How big an area to put on this? Well, it's a difficult one. I'd like this to fade away, and I'd like it to have some echoes of the colours in the cat. Possibly a little bit of, there's a touch of ochre there. And then could that be made to disperse more, so it just goes away in a sort of fog. Come back to that, because that's, again, I'd like to try and readjust these edges as they dry. Just lift that out. Maybe lift that out. That edge is more difficult because it's up against the texture of fur. I'm going to have to come back to that later. So this along the back here, I think this is a bit easier because it's out of focus. Or will be out of focus. Different brushes, slightly different brushes for each mix. And as long as there's some contrast, tonal contrast, colour contrast, that should help to make the cat seem lighter, or frame the cat. It's another intention of the background. It's not quite the right colour. Let's let that drift away. That's a bit like the colour that's in the cat already. So try and join these blurred edges onto each other, and then come in, see if I can bring that in a bit closer along the back here. And see if I can make that a blurred edge. Let's put a little more cerulean into the mix. Touch of cerulean blue, which is another good granulating colour. So there was a flare off there on the first layer of colour, and I'd like to try and keep that in mind. Just lift that out along the back there so that there's an impression of fur, soft fur, going up into that. So we needed something there to make that definition. Can't do that too many times because, let's do that again. I still can't do it too many times because just take away the colour completely. So the tail could be more lost. Can't rework this, that's another element to it. It's best to work away and work somewhere else and not to continue in the same place. So let's try the tail. Crimson. Yeah, that's a bit similar to the colour I've already got. What would be different? Something colder, something bluer. There's a nice colour called smalt blue, which is a kind of cobalt, I think, which granulate nicely, but I haven't got any of that. So we can make something very like it. Let's try that lifting again. The colour has gone back in here. Tends to dry along an edge there. I'd have to come back later and do that. This edge too, I'd like to make it more furry, more lost. So the tail's getting a little bit lost there, but it's still, I think it's still there. But on the top part, you'd expect there to be light, but not on the lower edge. That's got to be a little bit more in shadow. Let's try that, blur that. And then take away along there, along that edge. It's always a risk with something like a background, and you may feel want to leave it alone and don't want to try a background because it's too much of a gamble with something that you've already put quite a lot of time into. That's where doing a little trial can help to make your mind up. Is it going to be a good thing? Is it going to work? So that's, yeah, the colours are sort of just separating from each other, which I was hoping they would do. That's better along the top there, and I could continue lifting out, and I might continue working on that after it's dried a little more. It's important that this should dry slowly and naturally, because that helps the separation process. There are one or two backgrounds emerging, and that possibly they can be altered later. There's one or two other things to do. I've lifted off the masking fluid and kind of refined the whiskers a bit. I'm not sure I'll do a lot more. I can repair that, repair this, and repair that. So that's the Tabby Cat Reclining. I'm hoping you'll have a go at it, and I'm hoping the videos have been useful.